Okay, so hi everyone. And first off, can everyone hear me okay? Okay, good. So I'm Ashley Beavers, the Digital Projects and Preservation Librarian here at CLRC. I'm the one who digitizes, creates metadata, and fixes metadata on projects before they get uploaded and after they're uploaded onto New York Heritage. So if you ever see something in one of your collections that needs an edit or something fixed, email me what it is and I'll fix it, and more than likely it'll be that day. I also do the creation of the collection landing pages on New York Heritage website. So if any information like contact information needs updating, let me know about that too, and I'll fix that as well. I also run digitized materials that have text on them through OCR, which is optical character recognition. And if you are a member and have digitized materials that need OCR, email me with the files and I can do that for you. The only hiccup is that there's a page limit, so I will put you in the queue and I will notify you when they are done and provide you the Google Shared Drive folder with them. And when I find myself with some time and I have the files of the collection, I prep it for the digital dark archive, which is basically a backup of a backup of a backup. So we would be your last resource for retrieving your digitized collection if something were to happen to your other backups. And for those of you wondering or not, the preservation part of my title is to show that I have an archives background, so I am careful with materials. I'm also slowly taking over Ryan's projects and duties. Yeah. So we're going to cover CLRC's Access and Digitization Grant, which we give out every year. I'll go into general information on the grant, then into identifying projects for the grant, which is something for you to consider as you're moving forward on applying for your project or trying to pick between several potential projects. Then I'll cover what our digital projects assistant, Kayla, and I do in our in-house DigLab, which is digitization and metadata services, which unfortunately we're taking another pause on in-house projects, but I'll talk about that a little more later on. I'll also provide some project examples so you can get a sense of what some potential projects are, and then give you the grant timeline so everyone understands the process, and then finish with walking through the actual application. So going through each question and what it means and what we're looking for. So if at any point you have a question, please interrupt me, or you can write your question in the chat and I'll try to check the chat before I move on to the next slide. And if I happen to miss it, Ryan's here, so he'll keep an eye if I happen to miss it. So the goal of giving out these access and digitization grants is we want to do as much as we can for all of you to submit the best possible project so we can give an easy thumbs up and have our committees approve them. So by knowing our process, it will hopefully prepare you to put forth a project that's fully formed and is an easy yes. So originally these grants were called RBDB, but we renamed them Access and Digitization to make them more of a descriptive title. And this year we have $35,000 set aside in the budget for these projects. And Ryan can confirm this. We've tended to fund, at least in part, all viable projects. And this year we'll see what and how many applications come through and what our review committee thinks. So you do need to be a member of CLRC from one of our 4 listed counties listed. You also need to be either a full or affiliate membership level. And for those of you watching now and later, I provided links on the slide page to our member directory and to our membership levels pages on our website. And for those of you who are watching this afterward and are in one of our 4 counties and want to join, you can see if you are first already a member or want to become one and see which level best fits your organization and needs. So going on, these grants will be reviewed by our Library Resources and Services Committee, as well as an external review committee. And the Library Resources and Services Committee is made up of representatives from our members, and they'll go through all the applications, judge them on their worthiness, plan, budget, and then their recommendations are reviewed by an external committee, which is made up of colleagues from our other library councils of the state. And then this external committee helps us catch anything that we might have missed And then the final step is our board approves those recommendations, and then we'll notify you of the results. And one of the benefits of the structure is that I can help advocate on behalf of your projects, since we won't be the ones making the decisions, but the more information you give and provide and work with us as you're planning and putting forth your project or projects, the more we're able to explain it to the committees and the board, and that helps in the long run. So we see a range of projects that people apply for, but the biggest and most common one is digitization, which is the conversion of an analog resource or something that exists physically into a digital copy. So an example is a physical yearbook into a PDF or a physical photograph into a TIFF and JPEG. And this is where you're starting from an existing resource, an item, digitizing it, creating metadata, and then uploading it to a repository like New York Heritage, New York State newspapers, or your own repository. And we can work with a wide variety of formats. So let's see, photographs, yearbooks, cemetery and hotel registers, newspapers, glass plate negatives, photograph slides, catalogs, and scrapbooks, to name a few. And other formats are TIFF, JPEG, PDF, audio files, and video files. So we're able to be pretty flexible. The focus is on creating access to these historical and cultural heritage materials. So show us them. The materials need to be publicly available. So something up on New York Heritage, New York State historic newspapers, or your own repository. And this repository would have a repository structure. So something that is searchable, has an interface that can be used to search the database that contains the materials and records with metadata, and not just be pictures on a WordPress website. There also cannot be a paywall. It should be able to be accessed by the public without having to ask for it and without any other impediments similar to that. There is room for flexibility, but it needs to be somewhere that is accessible. And the materials and collection can be up on more than one repository, because it doesn't hurt to have it in multiple places. So if you have materials that aren't necessarily good fits for New York Heritage, it doesn't mean that they're not eligible for this grant. It just means that we would have to have a more in-depth conversation about where they're going to end up and how they're going to be accessible and all that. And I actually have an interesting example for having your materials accessible in a repository. I'm not going to name the organization, but due to one of their images being up on New York Heritage, a student reached out to them asking about getting permission to use that image in their student movie or documentary on New York State women's suffrage. And because it was on New York Heritage and it had context, the copyright permissions were stated, I think, and the holding institution was listed, that organization had to create a document on receiving a request to use an image and how they should be cited in the credits. So it was really cool. So for all of you, I really encourage you, and especially those with projects that you may not be sure of, to reach out to me and we can discuss the kind of particulars of your project. So especially if you didn't hear me mention that super specific material that you're interested in having digitized and be accessible, and your community is interested in accessing it, we can help work it out and make sure that it's eligible and explain how it's eligible to the review committees.
So Ashley, there was a quick question and we can answer it verbally. Suzanne asked if, there's a time frame where things need to be put up online.
Oh,
I can answer it
after an award. Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
So the timeline for these projects is, projects need to be completed by end of June of the following year. So that would include putting them up somewhere. So ideally, a project in this cycle would be complete by June 30th of 2025. And we're a little flexible on that. Like if there's a reason why you couldn't do it until a little bit after that, that's not like a deal breaker. It's just we want to have an endpoint so that projects don't roll on forever.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'll be giving another example of a project and collection that I actually just I checked today to see, is it actually up and accessible? So I think that might be on this slide. Yep, it's on this slide. So I'll get to that in a little bit. So another type of project we receive and do and is an aspect of digitization is metadata. So metadata is data about data. And a way to look at it is it's the descriptive work or cataloging that happens to make digital assets accessible. It helps describe things and helps you and others when searching and browsing materials. And this especially applies for materials that might not end up in one of our repositories, which I'll give you an example in a bit. We do require that you know your metadata and that if it falls under nationally recognized standards, which again feeds into that repository structure that we're looking for. You can use this grant to enhance existing metadata and or create new metadata. And I checked with Ryan, this also applies to enhancing or creating finding aids, because that's also data, metadata, and data. We really want digitized materials to be easily accessible. So like I said in the previous slide, not hidden away or being held captive in a tower, making it hard for people to find the materials. And while the majority of projects that we end up funding are digitization projects that have a metadata component, so you have a catalog, you have to create a catalog or create the descriptions in order to put them up in a repository. We also accept projects where the files are already there and you have the digital files, so you just need to put them up in another repository or maybe change some of it or add to what you already have, so you make them more accessible. And then the last point, the materials have to be accessible because this isn't a way to create metadata for your content management system that you use internally. This is something that the public can access. So that's another important consideration for metadata. And so this would be an external facing project we're looking for. And the example I have for a project collection that I worked on and that didn't go into New York Heritage or New York State historic newspapers was the Colgate University Alma Gracie Stokey papers, which I have never seen so many drawings of microorganisms of ferns. And just for this webinar, I checked and the collection is accessible for free on JSTOR. I don't think you can see when it was put up, but they put it up and it's been, I don't know, maybe like a year, but it's up, so it's all good. Next is unsupported expenses. So there are a number of expenses that we don't support, and this is because these are smaller grants and not really large, all-encompassing grants that we're giving out. So we don't cover overhead costs like rent, heat, or electricity. We also don't cover the purchase of new materials. So if you're digitizing materials, you need to already possess them. Though for oral history and community digitization projects, we would want you to know exactly what you're handling before you do it, because we've turned down projects in the past that were asking the community to bring in their stuff and they don't know who in the community is coming and what they're bringing. We really want to have it be something that you can give an inventory of what is going to be processed, because projects can be difficult to realize without having done a lot of that initial work. And it's harder to know what you're going to end up with and assess the project without knowing what the work is going to look like. We also don't support direct payments to libraries for interlibrary loan costs. There are other programs in place for interlibrary loan, and this is not a grant that handles that. We also don't allow for the purchase of an integrated library system for individual libraries. So we don't fund the creation of a repository. So no, sorry, we're not paying for that past perfect subscription. Another thing we don't fund is hours that an employee would already be working. The purpose of these grants is to increase capacity, so we're not subsidizing existing salaries. So if you already have a full-time staff member who's going to be doing this work, we wouldn't pay that staff member to do the work as part of the number of hours they're already working. So a lot of times this means if you're doing a project in-house, you might need to hire somebody part-time to do the work or to increase your capacity. And that can be really trying and hard to work through that for some organizations. We want to increase your capacity and don't want to just subsidize what you're already doing. Plus, there's Syracuse University iSchool nearby. I'm sure they might have some students who'd be interested. And the final one is we aren't able to fund projects that don't meet copyright requirements, but wait. So if you don't have the permission to share something, we aren't going to fund this digitization and metadata creation for those materials because the end goal is to be able to share them. But I'll touch on copyright in a little bit. So that's why throughout the application process, it's very important that you have the proper permissions or proper documentation for copyright, because our review committees do ask if these amazing projects have copyright permissions, and if the answer is then we would sometimes not fund, or we'd have to wait until a clear answer received before approving funding. So if you don't have copyright permission, try to obtain it, and if you get it, it's possible your project could be funded. Yeah. So identifying projects. First, you want to make sure you're identifying materials that are appropriate to be shared publicly, which meshes with the New York Heritage Collection Development Policy, and that's linked to on this slide page. And these slides will be shared with the recording later. We want materials to be of interest to a general audience, but if they are materials that are more sought after by like a good size specific audience, this grant is also for that. So an example is the Fletcher Steel scrapbooks, which are mostly full of garden architecture, planning, some design sketches, and photos of the project he did for individuals. And these were really desired by a certain audience, and they were always in use. So when we received them, there were some scrapbooks that he took photos of locations for inspiration like Haiti, Spain, Norway, Russia, Italy, and even showed building damage from the war in France, and also showed some of the historic moments he encountered. Like, in fact, he was in London, England when King George V died, which is Elizabeth II's grandfather. And so then you see the new King Edward VIII and his brother, the future King George VI, walking with the casket down the road. And it's like, that was a big surprise to find in his scrapbooks. So going back, you should consider copyright, but also privacy or access restrictions. So such as having materials that were donated with explicit privacy restrictions or access restrictions. Those shouldn't be digitized and made freely available on the internet. And there are some ethical considerations too, where maybe medical records might still have HIPAA restrictions attached to them, or even just sensitive materials that might result in some people being unhappy that their personal details are being shared. If you're identifying projects, you might want to think about the best way to process them. And this gets into the activities of the grant. So this will be on the grant, section on the grant. So helps to think about it. So like who's going to be doing the work and how, and you might consider doing a project in-house and hiring someone, or increasing somebody's part-time hours to do the project, or hiring a vendor. If scanning equipment is an issue or problem, as our member, we have scanners that we loan out. And in fact, one of the scanners is still currently with a member. Another consideration is the type of materials. Do you have the equipment or the ability to handle oversized materials, or the quantity of materials? Are they in bad condition? Do you smell vinegar coming from anywhere and not from a kitchen? If you do smell vinegar, then vinegar syndrome has started on one of the types of film. So just so you know. And in fact, because one of the projects we did accept, the Oakwood Cemetery Registers, we actually bought, or I think we still had, one of our cameras around and purchased some lights and just put together a copy stand. And now we're using it for a lot of our oversized materials. And I saved some good styrofoam that I'm using to help pad and sort of like create cradles for these oversized materials without damaging them. So really cool. Staffing. What kind of time and talent do you have available to you? It's great to hire an intern and or temporary workers. That's how I got to where I am currently. And so I won't go too further into that. I want to make sure I stick to time. And they can do amazing work, but of course, there's the extra amount of training and supervision that is required. And if you do go into doing an in-house project and hire an intern and want to use and upload it onto New York Heritage or New York State historic newspapers, I can provide training for them to use the spreadsheet that we use for uploading. Another part to consider that relates to metadata creation or writing descriptions is how much of an expert do you need to be able to process the materials? Some can be easy to do and self-describing, like a yearbook where you just check out the contents page if they have one. They don't always do, but it's not that difficult. Whereas a photograph that's been in a drawer, you might not have the context or information to know what it is in order to describe it, or even what's going on. Why is that child on skis going down a street? And I don't see a parent, but maybe the parent's holding the camera. So that photograph might require a lot more subject knowledge of what it is and what's going on. And possibly the biggest factor when asking for a grant is how much will it cost? Once you've figured out who's going to do the work and how they're going to do it, we like to see a reasonable budget in terms of, have you thought it through and how long the project is going to take? Make sure you're accounting for your costs appropriately. We don't want you going over budget and we don't want you going under. And it's always good to show your math when you've submitted it, because we like to check and see if we agree. Maybe we can it's good to put in a little bit of wiggle room sometimes. And of course, if you need, please reach out to us and talk us through some of the factors or even your math. We'd much rather help you figure that out in advance and have you submit an application that is reasonable and it keeps in terms with your goals and what you're hoping to accomplish. All right, so to wrap everything up, successful applications will tend to have well thought out project plans. They have a certain amount of conciseness, but not so much information so that it's hard to get to the crux of what you're asking for and what you're trying to do. A good amount of detail is good, which helps us to assess whether your plan is reasonable and detailed enough. Show your math for your budget, and you can show us your hourly rate and how many hours you're expecting a project to take, and we can say whether or not it seems reasonable. Since, what was it, the cemetery register project, we thought we had calculated the time correctly, but we then, because it's a very big book and pretty old, and I took my time when turning the pages because it's got a lot of people on there, we're now able to recognize, okay, this is how long it took us, and this is what we could probably use as an estimate for something of that size. Yeah. And don't forget about copyright. I included Cornell's LibGuide for copyright services on this slide page. So you can use that for, let's see, those photographs and other kinds of materials. Yearbooks have a specific copyright. And I need to see actually if it's changed yearly or not. So, but in other words, with newspapers, reach out to the copyright holder and get written permission from them that you can then submit via email to me, and then I'll attach it to your application, and we really want that copyright. And that also applies to any vendor quotes or any documentation like that in advance. And vendor documentation would be like the quote from the vendor or any documents from them about what they're going to do, what they're charging, and for how much. And we like to see institutions complete their projects successfully and on time, but we are understanding if something comes up. I mean, right now we are making headway in tackling our backlog thanks to Kayla. Thank you, Kayla. But if you had a grant from us from 3 years ago and haven't really done anything with it since then, it's probably not going to look very good. And we do have deadlines and we do have a timeline for these projects, but we are reasonable with working with you on those timelines. As long as you keep in contact with us and just don't like go ghosting somewhere, everything's good. And then we can keep track of how you're doing. And our report is very easy. I believe this is like our final report, not the interim report. But either way, both of them are pretty easy anyways. So our report is very easy. It's like maybe 5 questions. It's like, what did you end up actually doing? How did that differ from what you expected? Do you have any feedback or advice on the process? And we don't need receipts or a budget return. In fact, if you have money left over, and I believe someone recently asked both of us, Ryan and myself, and it was like, you can keep the money and use it for, I believe they asked if they could use it for archival purposes. And it's like, yeah, that's very useful and helpful. We just want to know what you've accomplished and how it went. And it should take around like 10 minutes to fill. And another consideration is large projects can be split across multiple years. And an example for that is Hamilton Public Library's 2022 grant project of digitizing their Mid-York weekly newspapers. And we just received phase 1, and probably next year, so like next grant cycle, they might put in a grant for phase 2. In fact, we got it right now on the copy stand. So our DigLab, normally we handle a good portion of our projects in-house, and I've been working on a few past projects in addition to some of Ryan's projects that he's given me, and that has slowed me down a little. But luckily we have Kayla working with us, and she's been doing our 2022 grant projects and making really good progress. We typically offer digitization and metadata projects that we do here in-house, like basically here in my office. You can see some newspapers I need to start tackling. And in the past couple of years, we've expanded on the number of projects to accept, and now we have a backlog, but we are reducing it quite a bit recently, very recently. So the reason we're not taking on any new projects is that we hope to finish up the rest of 2021 and 2022 projects. And then by next year, so next grant cycle, we will be able to start accepting in-house projects again. But even though we're not accepting any new in-house projects, there still are some services that we can do for you. We will do the upload process for you, and this is for all of our members, and so is the consulting on the process of getting things up into the newspaper website. And in fact, just I believe the beginning of this month, I've been working on the Central New York National Railway or Railroad Historical Society's recent batch of photographs to be uploaded and to replace some images with better ones. And it's taking me quite a couple of weeks because there's a lot of subject terms that need to be updated, but there's no problem in making corrections. And so the good news I can give you all is that hopefully after this grant cycle, which I really think is looking a lot more likely, it should be possible to accept in-house projects at the next grant cycle. And here we have a couple of projects. I didn't have time to link them, but these are the ones that have been completed, I think, within the last 2 years. And the one that I'm really interested in, and it's taking us a while to do it, especially because we've had students transcribe at least one book, is the Oakwood Cemetery Registers. Really hoping to get that uploaded at some point this upcoming year. Now I'm going to go through the grant timeline, and these are listed on our website. So first deadline, January 22nd. I'm not sure what day that's on, but it's okay. And that is for if you want a private consultation, and if you want to meet on Zoom or in person to discuss your project, just reach out before the 22nd. And this is so you're not waiting until the last day in January when the applications are due. So as soon as you decide you need one, reach out to me, and I believe I've had at least 3 people by this morning reach out to have a consultation. And after this, I will be able to fully get back to you guys. The second date is January 31st, which is, I think, a Friday. That's when the applications are due, both if you're going to do in-house or have a vendor done, they're all due then. And we'll go over this on the slide page, I think like the next page, the application. Then in February, we will have the Libraries Resources and Services Committee review and the external committee review the applications, which will then lead into March, where the board meets to approve those recommendations. And usually as soon as possible after that, I will announce to the recipients. So then that way their grant can start as soon as we give you like the news. And we'll email the checks, and we'll also sign a grant agreement that we make everybody sign to make sure we're all on the same page in terms of reporting and the timeline. So it's like, hey, I need your interim report. No big deal. Just get it to me. I think, let's see, January of next year, which I'll get to in a little bit now. Of course, then in January of next year, you'll have your interim report due, and this is really quick. You'll put where you are in the project. Like, I haven't even started, the vendor hasn't even contacted me. If that is the case, put that down just so like we know where you are and that you guys haven't like, we're just gonna go off and take the money and do whatever. But just like, so we know where you are. And you'll put where you are in the project, how much you have left to do, or it's like, oh, we just finished the project and we're all good. You can put that as well. And then we ask that the projects are completed by June 30th of next year, so 2025. So about 14 months or so to complete the project. Don't check me on math. I'm not that good with math. And some are able to be finished quickly and others can take some time, but that's okay. Just keep in contact with how it's going on. And now the application, let's see. Get to go through it. Let's see how this is going to show up. Ah, wonderful. Sorry, I'm going to have to look over here at my other screen for a bit. So here is the page for it all. Register. Here is, oh, wonderful. There's the copyright guide here as well, in addition to it being on the slides. And here, because when you start your application, the Google application, if you close it out, or I don't know, your page accidentally refreshes, the progress is not automatically saved. So use the Word doc just to like keep everything in there, or you can put it into a completely different text box. And so here actually, here's the grant timeline. And here are the past previous years that got their materials grants rewarded and for how much. And so now, okay, we're still good on time. We're gonna check out the application and I want to zoom in, make it easier to see. All right, so it's already populated some parts, but you're going to put your email down. You're also going to make sure that your full name is there for the name of individual and not just your first name, which I don't know why you'd only put my first name down, your telephone number. You're also going to see if there's anything with a red star next to it, that is required to be filled. Yeah, to be filled. Your library or institution name. And if you are going to submit more than one application, when you start filling out your first application, if that is the one that's more pressing, like what's it, an organization that received a grant last year, their yearbooks were all going to be shipped to Massachusetts because they were closing down their organization here in New York State, and all of them were going to be moved over. So I don't know what importance or number they put for their 2 projects, but I assume both of them were like 1 and 2. So you're going to start with 1 if you're gonna do more than one project, start with one. And after you, and pick a number, then start a second one and pick another number, so that way order of importance is put down. And if this is a collaborative project with another institution, you're gonna put institution and contact person per line, and you have space to do that, so no worries. You're also, for those of you who have attended here, you can check off the attended or viewed webinar. So you guys already got that done. Next is you're gonna put title of project. It can be, try to make it somewhat concise, but still descriptive. Try not to make it too long. Because actually, I don't think, yeah, there's no character limit, but don't make it too long of a titled project. Might be a bit hard to keep track of. Next, you're gonna give like a 1-sentence summary. So kind of like an abstract is how I viewed that as. Because you're gonna go more in detail a bit later on in some of the questions. So here, you're gonna describe the materials that your project will be accessible. So like if it's yearbooks, scrapbooks, that kind. I'm not sure which section would be best to put this, but also it's always good to like, hey, this is the condition of these materials, just a heads up. Because that would be very nice, because I know currently it's off camera, but I have one of the Mid-York weekly newspapers, which turned out to be bound. That's okay. But the first couple of pages are very wrinkled, folded over. And so right now I have like some little weights to hopefully straighten it out. So it's always nice to know like, hey, this is the condition. That's all right. Next, you're going to describe copyright status of the materials. So there is some, okay, there's character limit, but be as like, hey, this is, these materials don't appear to have any copyright. It doesn't look like any relative is living, and these look to be, what is it? What did I say? Published is, they seem to have been published in the 1920s, early 1920s. So, oh, check the Cornell LibGuide. If these were published, which is always like most possible. Oh, and they were early 1920s, copyright free. You're good. And this also, if you're like, we have some newspapers, but we're gonna see about getting copyright permission. This is where you're going to check off to see like, okay, this, where are we? And then depending on that, going to reach out to the copyright holder, see about getting permission. If you get permission, please attach it, email it to me, like I said earlier, but also check it off here. So that way it's sort of stated in the application, and that way it's sort of easier to keep them together. And then you're also going to put, why should they be made available? What's the value of them? Why is the reason that Colgate University was interested in having microorganisms of ferns digitized with scientific findings and research? Because they wanted to use it for, I believe, some of their classes. And because she was a woman in her field, I think it was like the early 1900s, which is, that's actually kind of impressive. I didn't get through all of the materials in the collection, sadly, so I'm not sure, maybe there were some more personal items in there that gave some more information, but this is where you state like, this is why this should be made available. And that also lets me know like, oh, that's actually really cool. Let me like really push our committees into like, this is why this is important. Don't you think this is important? And then get them to agree. And another question that we have, it's not required, but we're always trying to like have more materials of different people made available. And in fact, just today, because Ryan got some materials from the Everson Museum, I noticed there was a art exhibit catalog or booklet that had Haudenosaunee on there. I was like, oh, that is really cool. So now I'm like do we need to check with them to see if it's appropriate? But otherwise, something that's really cool. And that does promote diversity and inclusion. Next is describing specific activities that will be a part of the project. So like, who's going to be doing the work? What is the work? How are they going to go about it? And all of that. Shouldn't be anything to be needed attached. Then the big decision, where will the materials be made available? You select one of them. This is a required one because we're like, we need to know where these are going so people can see these. Next is describe the target audience for your project. It could be, I don't know, could be, let's see, SU students who are interested in using the data from, I'm really pushing the Oakwood Cemetery Register books for some reason today. We're going to see about the dates of people who were buried in the cemetery for specific years, or what was their cause of the deeds, or why is that person buried before they were born? That's very odd, and that has shown in the book, strangely. So you're going to see like, okay, so getting the data from the Oakwood book, it could help with a lot of scientific papers, but also could just show the human side of things. And that could be for a lot of people. Or it's like, hey, let's see, Liverpool yearbooks. Good for the alumni group who was like, oh, let's plan our reunion. But a lot of people can use like to look at yearbooks. And I admit I've looked at a lot of yearbooks, and especially because my mom is from up here, so it's like, oh, look at you, I get to see you in your yearbook for once. So next you're going to outline the steps you will take to evaluate your project. So see how it goes, what you, I guess, sort of plan to have happen, sort of like that. And as well as explain your plans for supporting the project after grant period has ended. Some projects, I guess, let's see, so for yearbooks, it's supporting the project would be sort of, I guess, raising awareness, like, hey, we have this, so putting it out on your social media, maybe putting like a banner out at your library, or put like, what's it, notifying your members of your historical society through a newsletter saying like, hey, we recently have this collection uploaded, and in the future we might be interested in doing a couple more, but this is what we've done so far, and isn't this really cool and interesting, and don't you want to like help support or fund us to do another cool project like this? Next section is the budget. So you're going to do personnel costs. So this will be showing your math for if you're going to hire somebody or part-time person who's going to do the hours performed and their hourly rate. So lots of numbers, lots of math. It's okay. And actually, I did not check. You have a lot of space, so no problems. You're also going to show funds requested for personnel. So I believe this would, of course, show your math. This is could either be, I guess, like the hourly, or maybe like the total per week or month, or however you want to break it down. And then right below it, you're going to describe any vendor or contractor costs. So as soon as you contact that vendor, get a piece of documentation from them, believe you can email it to me, and you can also just, I guess, maybe put here, go so-and-so vendor as, I guess, like the name, I guess, because that I still would attach the documentation sent to me to the application, and I guess right there, excuse me, would be a good spot. And funds requested for vendors or contractors, it would hopefully be within the documentation or quote that they give you that would be in their paper. So this part well, it's not required. So you could put some of that information here, but it's not required. Just make sure that attachment is sent to me. That piece of that paper is attached to me. Then you can describe any supplier or equipment costs. The equipment. So I'm really trying to get people to be aware that, yes, we have scanners here that you can borrow, no problem, no cost. So I guess just putting down like, oh, we are going to hopefully borrow 10,000 Epson XL scanner from you. I feel like that would be pretty good. Then going on, funds requested for supplies or equipment. Oh, let's be whole number. Cool. Okay, and then describe any additional expenses. Gotta know enough space. It's always good to have enough space, I guess, for if you need to include any numbers and whatnot. Funds requested for additional expenses. I think maybe skip some of these because these are all not required. Okay, in-kind contributions. Total grant funds requested. This is important. So this is what you will be requesting. And I don't know if Ryan still like says to like always shoot like a little bit above what you are hoping to get, because that way when the committees review it, they will like, oh, just they don't need that much. Let's just take it down to the actual number that you are requesting for. So like I don't know. Let's see. So like I'll spitball $1,000 to do some metadata for like a little small collection of photographs. And then they'll be like, oh, I don't think you need that much, but so we'll just cut it down to, I don't know, like 800 or like 500. And you're like, that is the amount that I was hoping for, but I just put in a bit more just to make sure I'd get that amount that I really want. So whole number here. And also it's good to know if you will accept partial fundings, because sometimes some projects can still at least be half completed. Hence the Mid-York Weekly newspapers, they're doing their yearbooks in phases of, I have no idea how many, but I mean, we have phase 1 and this is going to be like a multi-year thing. So partial funding could be just like, instead of doing the whole collection of someone's materials, you do like half of it, and then you just wait until next year to finish the other half. So partial funding for just half of the collection. And then if you do select yes, put down like how it will affect your project, sort of like this will slow down fully completing the accession of this collection and making it available to people who are really interested in, I have no idea, stained glass. We'll still have half of it completed, but we really hope for full, but we'll still accept partial to get this project going. And then going to conclusion, you're just gonna, anything else you'd like to tell us about your project, more information on like, this is why my project is really interesting and we'd really appreciate full funding. And yeah, and oh, has all necessary documentation been sent via email? But I forgot about this question, but that's a very good one. So this is another one. Make sure you email all the necessary documents that you should to me. And yeah. Oh, and because you put your email address or your organization's email address down, you will get a copy of what you have put in all of these questions. So that's really good to know. And let's see if I can get back to, of course, it put me right over and let's see. Ah. Got it. Next. Any final questions or anything you want me to expand on? I really look forward to giving out these grants. I think we're able to fund some really cool projects over the years, like really. And more recently, we've really expanded the kinds of projects that we're willing to take in, like Oakwood Cemetery registers. I know Another project are some hotel ledgers that sadly the hotel is being used not as a hotel anymore, but as a place for, I think it was going to be turned into like a place for low income people, which is really cool. And I'm glad that they were able to get these giant ledgers out. And apparently there are a lot of really famous signatures in them. So that's like, they're coming this way. And newspapers are also really cool. Photographs, oh, that's right, glass plate negatives. I got the chance to actually learn how to clean them. And so now I know how to clean them for all that. And we have a scanner that can actually do it with like full definition of it, like really get down there so we can make archival copies, but then put up sort of like access copies. So they're not like as high quality. So that way people are like, oh, we want to see those really high def ones, but they actually have to email for free, no paywalls. It's all good. Let's see, where was I? It's really nice to be able to give out and help people do things, and we really try our best to work with folks and make sure everybody can be successful in the project. So please reach out to me, bombard me with emails. I will get to them if there's tons of them, but I will get to them eventually. And I will definitely be checking myself, especially for next month for applications, because I know the stress and worry of like, they get the application, is everything good? Do I need to do any feedback, or I have a question, I can't finish it until I have like this one question answered for some reason. It's like, it's okay. I will be keeping on it. And I know Ryan will be maybe not poking me with it, but definitely checking in with me a lot. So please reach out to me if you want a meeting to talk you through what a project could look like. Like, I know you have a specific form that, not specific form, a specific material that's like, you didn't hear me talk about, but you think would be really cool to have made accessible. And so, because I can't see the chat because of how I have minimized Zoom, I'm just gonna finish this part off and then wait for questions. Thank you all for coming, and to those who are watching afterwards, I look forward to hearing from you and discussing your projects further. Thank you all for attending, and happy holidays. Let me check. Get to.
Thank you, Ashley. There weren't many questions. I answered a couple that were kind of brief in chat. But just for the folks who are watching after the fact, I can kind of vocalize my response. So there was a question clarifying the pause in our in-house DigLab project. So this current cycle that we're in now, we won't be able to accept new projects, but the next deadline, which will be like January 31st of 2025, we're hoping to be all caught up then. And the idea is we're about a year behind. So if we accepted new projects, it'd be a year before we started them. So instead of giving a grant now that we aren't going to be able to complete for a year, we're kind of taking that pause ourselves. And we've done so many interesting projects like Ashley mentioned, so we said yes too many times. So we're just catching up on that.
Plus, I don't think anybody would want to have their materials on my shelf for a whole year just waiting, although it's safe from elements and it's above ground, but still, you always like to know where they are and if they're okay. Oh, I see. Oh, thank you for linking them. Thank you.
Yeah, I threw a bunch of links in too.
Okay, let me see that. Oh.
All right, I don't think we're seeing any questions, but that just means you covered everything with great detail, and I think again, as Ashley mentioned, email her if you have any questions, and we can be pretty flexible, and we can do quite a bit with these. So don't be afraid to ask.
Mm-hmm. I ended right on time. Nice.
All right.
That's great. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Take care.
You too.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. My buttons are fun.
Bye now.
Bye. Okay, no. Button.